They say kindness is a virtue, compassion one of the highest human traits. But here's the tragic flaw in human interaction. Not everyone sees it that way. There are people, predators in psychological clothing, who interpret virtue as vulnerability, who regard openness not as strength, but as a door left unlocked. They look at a kind person and think, this one is mine to mold. They see compassion and they smell control. And that's where the narcissist makes their first and most critical misjudgment. The narcissist operates in a world where relationships are transactions and power is the currency. They don't understand empathy, not really. They mimic it when it suits them. They learn the language, the behaviors, the timing. But underneath it all is a void, a hollow place where depth should be. And into that emptiness, they project their need to dominate. They seek out the gentle, the generous, the emotionally intelligent, because they know those are the people who will hesitate before defending themselves. They assume those people won't fight back, won't see through the manipulation, won't challenge the lies. So they test, they push boundaries, subtly at first. They play victim to elicit sympathy. They create small storms just to see if you'll stay through the thunder. And when you do, when the empath does, they feel validated in their belief that kindness equals submission, that silence means approval, that patience is just passivity in disguise. But that's where the narcissist makes a fatal mistake, because the empath's kindness isn't born of fear, it's born of understanding. They're not naive. They're choosing to see the best in someone, sometimes to their own detriment, but that choice has limits, because the empath is not weak. They're observing, they're collecting data, they're weighing their conscience against their exhaustion. And when the scale tips, when the cost of staying becomes greater than the cost of leaving, the narcissist meets a side of the empath they never imagined existed. This is the part they never calculate for, the inner fire of someone who gave everything in good faith and was met with contempt. The quiet storm of someone who has finally seen enough. When an empath walks away, they do it without theatrics, without war, but with total resolve. And that's where the narcissist loses not just control, but the illusion they built around it. The mistake then was not in underestimating the empath's intellect. It was in misjudging the moral structure that governs their behavior. The empath was never playing the same game. They were operating on principles, on loyalty, on a belief in redemption. But once those values are trampled beyond repair, the game ends, not with revenge, but with freedom. And in that moment, the narcissist isn't just alone, they're exposed, because all their power was borrowed, and the empath just took it back. An empath's threshold is not easy to understand, especially for those who manipulate as instinctively as they breathe. The empath is wired for connection. They are drawn to the emotional undercurrents that most people miss or ignore. They can feel your sadness before you speak it. They can carry your burden without being asked. And they will endure almost endlessly, not because they lack self-respect, but because they operate from a deeper belief that people are capable of change, that brokenness can be healed, and that love is not transactional. This is where the dynamic with the narcissist becomes particularly dangerous. The empath gives, and the narcissist takes. The empath sees the pain behind the mask, the trauma behind the manipulation, and so they stay. They forgive lies. They excuse cruelty. They rationalize neglect, not because they are blind, but because they hope. They hope the person in front of them will rise to meet their potential, that they will grow into the love they're being shown. But the narcissist confuses this endurance for permission. They think, if they haven't left, I haven't done anything wrong. They do not recognize emotional labor unless it serves their narrative. They don't grasp the concept of someone sacrificing for the sake of another's well-being without an agenda. And so they keep pushing further and further testing how much the empath will absorb. But here's the truth no narcissist understands until it's too late. The empath's forgiveness is not infinite. It is vast, yes, deep as the ocean, but it has a floor. And once the empath hits it, the shift is instant. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it is absolute. There is no begging, no second chance, no grand gesture that will undo the damage. Because the empath doesn't leave when it's convenient. They leave when they're empty. That's what makes it irreversible. The empath does not operate on pride or ego. They don't walk away to punish. They walk away because the bond has disintegrated, the hope is gone, the emotional field where they once planted love has become barren. And once that inner switch is flipped, it cannot be turned back on. Not by charm, not by guilt, not by promises. The narcissist often scrambles at this point. The love bombing returns, the apologies come flooding in, but the empath sees through it now, not with anger, but with clarity. The very thing they were criticized for, their sensitivity, their depth, becomes their strength. They don't retaliate. They don't campaign. They simply detach. Because when an empath is truly done, they are done on every level, emotional, psychological, spiritual. And that is what terrifies the narcissist most. Not the loss of supply, but the realization that their control was an illusion all along. The empath always had the power. They just didn't use it until now. Control, that's the axis on which the narcissist's entire identity turns. It's not love they seek, it's domination disguised as connection. They don't want intimacy, they want compliance. So they gravitate toward those who feel deeply, who give without calculation, who endure with grace. The empath is the perfect match at first, not because the empath is weak, but because they are open, vulnerable, receptive. The narcissist sees these traits not as virtues, but as leverage points, tools to manipulate, soft spots to exploit. For a time, the dynamic serves them. The narcissist provokes and the empath soothes. The narcissist withdraws and the empath chases. The narcissist lies and the empath questions themselves. It becomes a cycle of emotional dependency, but only for one of them. The narcissist feels in control not because they are loved, but because they are needed. They thrive on emotional reactivity. It's the mirror through which they see themselves. If you care enough to cry, they matter. If you argue, they exist. If you stay, they win. But this game, this toxic loop, only works as long as the empath remains emotionally invested. That's the linchpin. That's the cord that keeps the narcissist's illusion intact. The moment that cord is cut, everything collapses. And here's where the narcissist always miscalculates. They push too far. They believe the empath will always come back, always forgive, always explain themselves. But the empath isn't endlessly malleable. They're observant, and when they begin to detach, it's not loud, it's not theatrical, it's internal, it's quiet, and it's lethal to the narcissist's control. Emotional detachment for an empath doesn't look like rage. It doesn't look like slamming doors or shouting matches. It looks like a blank stare where there used to be concern. It looks like silence where there used to be discussion. It feels like a wall built not out of malice but necessity. The empath, once overwhelmed with emotion, becomes calm, icy even. And that calm is not peace for the narcissist. It's terror, because it means their grip is gone. The narcissist will try to reel them back in through guilt, through pity, through promises of change, but it won't work because emotional detachment is not a tactic, it's a conclusion. The empath no longer needs to prove their point. They no longer need to understand the narcissist's wounds. The desire to fix, to rescue, to hold space, that desire is gone, and with it, the narcissist's power evaporates. The narcissist can't operate in a vacuum. They need an audience, a reaction, a response. The empath, once detached, offers none of that. No more tears, no more pleading, just distance, just presence without engagement. And that absence of emotional supply is unbearable for someone who only ever knew how to feed on others. The moment the empath detaches, the narcissist isn't just losing a person, they're losing control, relevance, and the fragile identity they built on someone else's compassion. The mask slips, and they're left alone with the one thing they've always feared, themselves. You have to understand something fundamental about human behavior. People don't fear punishment as much as they fear irrelevance. A narcissist, in particular, doesn't crumble when they're confronted. They don't break when they're yelled at, insulted, or even exposed. In fact, they thrive in the heat of emotional chaos. Anger gives them energy. Retaliation feeds their sense of significance. It tells them, I still matter to you, I still have power. What they cannot endure, what shatters their illusion, is silence, indifference, the absence of emotional reaction. That, to them, is annihilation. The empath, for most of the relationship, is deeply engaged, not just emotionally, but spiritually. They care, they invest, they analyze, they try to understand the narcissist's wounds, to hold space for their brokenness. And every time they respond, whether in love, sadness, frustration, or pain, they reinforce the narcissist's sense of importance. It's not a fair exchange, it's a one-way valve. The narcissist consumes what the empath provides and gives back nothing but confusion and control. But so long as the empath reacts, the narcissist feels in command. Then something begins to shift. The empath starts to see through the patterns, not suddenly, but in fragments. They see how their compassion is being used as a tool against them. They see that no amount of kindness is ever enough. And when the realization becomes unbearable, the response isn't rage, it's silence. That silence is deafening to the narcissist because it represents more than the absence of words, it represents the withdrawal of validation. No more justifying, no more explaining, no more crying, just stillness, just space, just an emotional vacuum where there was once devotion. And in that space, the narcissist finds something they cannot manipulate, nothing. Indifference is the final verdict. It's the empath saying, not in words, but in energy, you no longer exist in my emotional reality. And for the narcissist, that's worse than any revenge. Because anger still implies investment. Indifference is the death of relevance. The narcissist can't stand being unseen. They rely on mirrors to define themselves, and the empath's attention was the clearest one they ever had. Now it's gone, and they're left with the blur of their own reflection, distorted, hollow, incomplete. They may try to provoke a reaction, stir up drama, feign crisis, anything to pull the empath back into the loop. But the empath, once they reach indifference, no longer participates in the performance. They've outgrown the stage. The narcissist isn't prepared for that. They're not equipped to deal with a person who no longer needs to prove anything, no longer needs closure, no longer needs them. Silence, then, is not just a refusal to speak, it's a declaration of freedom. And indifference is not coldness, it's the final act of self-respect. The empath doesn't need to punish the narcissist. They simply stop feeding them, and that is the one thing a narcissist cannot survive. The narcissist's world is one of emotional volatility, unpredictable, erratic, and deliberately unbalanced. It's not an accident, it's a tactic. Emotional chaos is the fuel that drives their need for control, their desire for dominance, and their pathological hunger for significance. Without tension, without conflict, Without a constant flux of reactions, they begin to unravel because they don't exist as a stable idea. They exist in contrast to others' emotions. If you feel deeply about them, whether it's love or pain, they feel real. But if you don't react at all, they start to disappear even to themselves. This is why the empath is such a prime target. Empaths don't just feel emotion, they metabolize it. They absorb tension, confusion, sorrow, and try to convert it into peace. They try to understand chaos, to bring order to it. And the narcissist exploits this like a musician plays an instrument. One moment affection, the next withdrawal. One day praise, the next criticism. It's a cycle designed to keep the empath off balance, always reaching, always questioning, always trying to restore harmony that was never meant to last. But this game has a limit. The empath, after enough exposure to this emotional dissonance, begins to awaken to the pattern. It's not sudden, it's cumulative. They start noticing how the narcissist thrives during arguments, how apologies are tools for resetting the game, not signs of growth. They realize they're constantly managing someone else's instability while their own well-being decays in the background. And in that realization, a door opens. Healing for the empath is not just about escape, it's about transformation. It's a process of returning to one's center, of recognizing that not all emotional storms are worth walking into, that not every person in pain deserves a healer, especially when that pain is weaponized. Once the empath begins to heal, they stop dancing to the narcissist's rhythm. They stop explaining themselves to someone who's not listening. They stop absorbing emotions that were never theirs to carry. The narcissist, faced with this new version of the empath, calm, clear, grounded, begins to panic. Not overtly, but internally their system starts to malfunction. They throw provocations, accusations, emotional bait. But the empath doesn't respond. They've seen this movie before and they've already left the theater. The narcissist loses traction, loses their ability to steer the dynamic, because emotional chaos only works on those still tied to the outcome. The healed empath is no longer attached. They don't need closure. They don't need understanding. They've found peace in the absence of noise. And that peace is impenetrable to the narcissist's old tricks. What once pulled them in now repels them. What once hurt now teaches. They've learned that emotional chaos is not love. It's not depth. It's manipulation disguised as intensity, and they refuse to participate. That refusal, that quiet, unwavering boundary is the end of the narcissist's power, because they can't create chaos without a co-star. And the empath finally has left the stage. Control and significance. These are the twin pillars upon which the narcissist constructs their fragile sense of self. Not authentic self-worth, but a manufactured identity propped up by illusion, manipulation, and the responses of others. You have to understand, the narcissist doesn't exist in isolation. Their very sense of being is relational, defined not by who they are, but by how much control they exert over those around them, particularly over someone who gives freely, loves deeply, and stays long after it starts hurting. Someone like an empath. The empath, for a time, becomes the mirror in which the narcissist sees themselves. Not their true self, but a grandiose reflection, crafted from admiration, tolerance, and emotional investment. The narcissist feeds on this dynamic. It confirms the fantasy, I matter more, I'm special, I'm in control. So what happens when the empath walks away? Not in anger, not in chaos, but in clarity. Everything collapses because it's not just the loss of attention that destabilizes the narcissist. It's the exposure. The empath's departure is a revelation. It tears the mask from the narcissist's face and shows them what they've been avoiding all along, that their power was never real. It was conditional, dependent, fragile. The empath, once thought to be under their thumb, was the very foundation of their identity. When that foundation is gone, the narcissist is left in free fall. And what makes it worse, what makes it unbearable, is that the empath leaves not to punish, but to preserve. There's no vengeance, no drama, no final speech, just silence, just absence. That absence becomes a mirror the narcissist can't bear to look into, because in it, they don't see a powerful figure. They see a desperate one, someone whose significance lived only in someone else's perception. The narcissist may try to rebuild the illusion, find a new empath, start the cycle over, but something has changed. The loss lingers. The control they thought they had now feels tenuous, because deep down they know someone saw through them. Someone who once gave them everything now sees them as nothing. That kind of departure isn't just rejection, it's erasure. It tells the narcissist, you don't get to define me. You never did. And that realization, the brutal moment when the narcissist understands they were never the strong one, is where the entire architecture of their false self begins to crumble. Without the empath, there's no script to follow, no audience, no reflection, just silence, just the weight of their own emptiness. The empath, by leaving, doesn't just end a relationship, they shatter an illusion. And for the narcissist, that's the most painful truth of all, that the only real control they ever had was over someone who finally decided they were done. There's a common misconception in our culture that power is loud, that it shows itself through confrontation, through dominance, through forceful displays of anger or strength. But that's not power, that's insecurity and armor. True power, the kind that sustains itself without collapsing under the weight of ego, is quiet. It's rooted. It doesn't shout. It doesn't prove. It decides. And nowhere is that more evident than in the moment an empath chooses to walk away, not in rage, not in bitterness, but in clarity, in peace, in the full possession of their own boundaries. You see, when someone has lived under emotional manipulation, under the thumb of someone who thrives on control, the act of staying can feel like strength, like endurance, and for a time it is. The empath stays not out of weakness, but because they believe in potential. They believe in healing. They try to bring stability to chaos, light to confusion. And that instinct is noble, but it comes at a cost. Steady erosion of the self. The narcissist, for their part, mistakes this endurance for dependence. They see compassion and assume fear. They see forgiveness and interpret it as submission. So they push further. They escalate. Because confrontation is their currency. It's how they assert dominance. If you scream, they've won. If you plead, they feel powerful. Emotional reaction is their lifeline. But what they can't survive, what they never expect, is peace. The empath, once they've seen enough, doesn't always explode. They withdraw. And that withdrawal is not passive. It's intentional. It's an assertion of sovereignty. It's the moment they say, this ends now. Not because you changed, but because I did. That is power. Power is drawing a boundary and expecting no applause. Power is refusing to engage in the chaos that once consumed you. Power is walking away with your dignity intact, knowing that no argument, no explanation, no final word is needed. You don't need to be heard to be certain. You don't need revenge to be free. The narcissist cannot process this kind of power. It exposes the shallowness of their own tactics. They provoke and expect combustion, but instead they're met with silence, with non-reactivity, with absence. And in that moment, the game ends, not with a bang, but with a door quietly closing. And make no mistake, it's the decision to not fight that defines the healed empath's strength. It's restraint. It's the rejection of the false narrative that your worth is proven in struggle. It's the understanding that some battles are won by refusing to enter the arena at all. Walking away isn't giving up. It's rising above. It's reclaiming the self after it's been scattered across years of emotional compromise. That's not weakness. That's mastery, because the strongest people aren't the ones who overpower others. They're the ones who no longer allow themselves to be overpowered. And so when the empath finally steps away, quietly, firmly, without fanfare, they do something the narcissist cannot comprehend. They reclaim themselves, not through vengeance, not through dramatic exits or final confrontations, but through stillness, through truth. They choose peace over chaos, self-respect over validation, clarity over confusion. That choice, unshakable, quiet, and final, is the most powerful act of all. The empath who's done is not bitter, but awakened, not hardened, but wise. And the narcissist, left grasping at shadows, finally faces the hollow truth they've long evaded, that control was never real, that power built on manipulation is no power at all, and that the one they thought they had broken simply chose to heal. And healing, that radical act of refusing to participate in your own devaluation, is the final word. Not spoken in anger, but lived in freedom.